This is Rob Kilmer. What is the debate on health care reform? That's what we're going to be talking about this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. I apologize for the delay getting the show started. Okay, callers and guests, as always, will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topic up for the next show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my posts and leave your own. The lineup for the Sunday talk shows will be posted there on Saturdays if they are posted online for me to get by then. You can also listen to my show live on streaming audio on www.wnbf.com. My show is then uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays. Finally, there is a new debate suggestions section. It is at the top of the home page, as is a debate registration section related to the upcoming pilot for the debate, July 12th at SUNY Waters Theater. And you can, if you have questions you would like asked during the debate, the topic being the role of the Supreme Court Justice, or if you wish to attend the debate, you need to pre-register there. Okay, this week we're going to talk about health care. President Obama outlined to some extent his health care reform proposals this past week, and I think almost more so than any issue that is discussed, this is an example of an issue that is discussed in emotional terms, with labels and characterizations. All the while, the problem never gets close to being resolved. I don't think there's any question out there that we have a health care problem in this country, a health care cost problem. We also have a health care quality problem. But year after year, it goes unaddressed, and it gets swamped in these competing charges of meant to scare you, just exactly what we talk about on this show all the time. So what I want to start with is an article from ABC News Online. This was June 7th. President Obama stepped off a plane from Paris Sunday and into his next domestic crisis. Quote, "The status quo is broken. We cannot continue this way," end quote, Obama said in his weekly address. Quote, "If we do nothing, everyone's health care will be put in jeopardy," end quote. The president wants a health reform bill that covers all Americans on his desk by August, reaching for a goal that has eluded presidents for decades in a single summer. He had planned to leave the details of health care reform to Congress as long as they met his broad goals for a plan that would lower costs, improve quality and coverage, and also protect consumer choice. But now the White House says he'll play a much stronger role, including demanding an optional government-run health plan. Quote, "The president and many others believe that the availability of a public option alongside private options for people who need health care is a positive thing," Presidential Advisor David Axelrod told CBS. He is going to promote that as part of his plan, end quote. ABC News has learned that Senator Edward Kennedy, who has vowed to make health care the cause of his life, has drafted a plan that would require employers to insure their workers. A Kennedy aide cautioned that this was a draft of a draft and subject to change. Health insurers are skeptical of Democratic efforts that could present them with a government rival or restrict their profits. Blue Cross Blue Shield of America is planning advertisements opposing a, quote, government plan, end quote, without mentioning that the new plan would pose a rival to the company's own. Republicans, who have been left out of the administration's planning, have already drawn battle lines. Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has taken to the Senate floor all week, repeatedly lambasting what he calls a, quote, government takeover of health care, end quote. And finally, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley on Sunday sent this angry message via Twitter. Quote, "Pres Obama, you got nerve while you sightseeing in Paris to tell us time to deliver on health care," end quote. Okay, so the debate is underway, to some extent, on health care. Obama has laid out in broad terms what he wants. Republicans have characterized it as government takeover of health care so far. Now, I want to put this entire issue into context. This is from the National Coalition on Health Care. And these are facts on the cost of health insurance and health care in 2008. In 2008, health care spending in the United States reached $2.4 trillion and was projected to reach $3.1 trillion in 2012. Healthcare spending is 4.3 times the amount spent on national defense. In 2008, the United States will spend 17% of its gross domestic product on healthcare. It is projected that the percentage will reach 20% by 2017. Although 46 million Americans are uninsured, the United States spends more on healthcare than other industrialized nations, and those countries provide health insurance to all citizens. Healthcare spending accounted for 10.9% of the gross domestic product in Switzerland, 10.7% in Germany, 9.7% in Canada, and 9.5% in France, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, under a section entitled Employer and Employee Health Insurance Costs, it says, the annual premium that a health insurer charges an employer for a health plan covering a family of four averaged $12,700 in 2008. Workers contributed nearly $3,400, or 12% more than they did in 2007. The annual premiums for a family coverage significantly eclipsed the gross earnings for full-time minimum wage worker, $10,712. Since 1999, employment-based health insurance premiums have increased 120%, compared to a cumulative inflation of 44% and a cumulative wage growth of 29%. The average employee contribution to company-provided health insurance has increased more than 120% since 2000. Average out-of-pocket costs for deductibles, co-payments for medications, and co-insurance for physician and hospital visits rose 115% during the same period. The percentage of Americans under age 65 whose family-level out-of-pocket spending for health care, including health insurance, exceeds $2,000 a year rose from 37% in 1996 to 43%. Rose from 37.3% in 1996 to 43.1% in 2008. Finally, the impact of rising health care costs. National surveys show that the primary reason people are uninsured is the high cost of health insurance coverage. Economists have found that rising health care costs correlate to drops in health insurance coverage. Okay. Lastly, a recent study by Harvard University researchers found that the average out-of-pocket medical debt for those who filed for bankruptcy was $12,000. The study noted that 68% of those who filed for bankruptcy had health insurance. In addition, the study found that 50% of all bankruptcy filings were partly the result of medical expenses. And every 30 seconds in the United States, someone files for bankruptcy in the aftermath of a serious health problem. I realize that was a bit long-winded, but I think it's important to put this entire issue in context before we discuss attempts to address it. I don't think there's anybody out there who believes that health insurance costs are under control, or that health care costs, uninsured costs, are under control in this country. We fear them as a country. We make decisions based on those. Yet, year after year, we go without addressing these because it's easier to make people more frightened of the alternatives or of the proposals than it is to make them deal with the really frightening situation itself, which is the cost of care in the United States, be it insurance or the bills if you're uninsured. We'll be right back. You're listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. I'm throwing that 607 in there now because I've heard from people who have listened to it on WMBF website, the WMBF website, out of the area. I wanted my global listeners to be able to call in. Okay, the GM website. I wanted to get to this fact before this is the last fact we'll really go over. The GM website indicates that General Motors, in 2007, it spent $4.6 billion to cover healthcare costs. And what's happened to GM since then? I, for one, and that's all I'm going to read to you. Those are the facts for today that I'm going to put out there. I have never understood the relationship between being an employer and having to provide health insurance for employees. I don't know how that ever started. In fact, I've never understood why Republicans don't view this in and of itself as excessive governmental regulation of business. Why should the employer have to pay for your health insurance? Should your employer have to pay for your child's college education? I don't know where this came from. And I mean that literally. I'm sure there are many people out there, and if anybody listening knows how this started and why, call in. But I don't frankly understand the relationship between the two. Why does your employer have to provide you with health insurance? I think at this point in time, without reform, it'll have to stay that way. And unfortunately, it looks like reform will include, or may include, that your employer has to provide it. I don't know how that's going to end up, if there is reform at all. But unless and until we address the health care costs in this country, I mean, forget about families for now. How is American business supposed to survive? I see this as part of the effort to rescue the economy. I honestly don't know if Obama's pitching it that way or not, but that's what I think it is. How can it be? How can you address the problems we're having nationally without addressing this? 20% of our gross domestic product, or 17% right now. We spend more on this than we do on defense. 4 times. 4.3 times as much as we spend on protecting this country, we spend on health care. And we're not the best at it. We don't provide the best health care in the world. And at least, I'll give him this much credit, Obama appears to be talking about costs as part of the overall solution here. And I've used this analogy on the show before. I mean, it's like trying to figure out how to pay for a $300 apple without saying, why does this apple cost $300? It's ridiculous. But we don't. We just mindlessly go forward trying to figure out ways to pay for something nobody can pay for without ever figuring out, or trying to, why it costs so much in the first place. And why it costs so much more here than anywhere else. These are issues you can't avoid, and these are issues you shouldn't avoid if you're looking to make a long-term improvement in the economy in the United States. I mean, look at GM, $4.6 billion on healthcare costs. How are they supposed to compete? And lo and behold, they didn't. But who's next? I mean, we had talked about this before, that talking about the bailouts and the unions wanting or being asked to make concessions, and how the average American unionized worker at these plants, the cost to the plant is $60 some odd an hour or $70 an hour per employee versus $45 or $50 at other manufacturers in other countries. That's a health insurance issue. That's not a union greed issue. That's a health insurance issue. The added cost is health insurance. I don't know how any company pays it. And I don't know why they have to. I guess they have to because we have no other plan. And once you start talking about government, then people start screaming socialism and all this other nonsense without actually offering an alternative of their own. In the meantime, we end up with the same problem year after year, and it's come home. There are certainly parts of our economy that are in crisis right now, the automotive industry in particular. And it is beyond dispute that that is in some way related to the costs of health care. So, I mean, if ever there was an issue where you were either part of the solution or part of the problem, this is it. What are the alternatives being offered? I never hear any. I hear occasional references to tax credits and things of that nature. But tax credits, that means you have to pay the money up front. You get a credit on your taxes for what you pay for health insurance, which is all well and good unless you can't pay for the health insurance, which Americans can't. So I don't understand how that even works. If the theory is that you're setting out to address a problem where people can't afford something, then how can you reward them for paying for it? They don't have the money. The people, it would seem to me, and I'm open as always to other points of view on this, but it seems to me that at first blush, it looks like the people who need the help are the ones who cannot possibly, are the same people who could never get it under that structure. I don't know how you can seek a refund when you can't pay up front. To me, that's kind of a intellectual non-starter. I don't know how you benefit with a tax break for buying something you can't afford. And in the meantime, obviously, that does not address costs, which seems to be the culprit here, or at least part of it. Think about this. How many people do you know, how many Americans make actual career decisions based upon the availability of health care? I have friends, one in particular, who considered buying a business. In fact, a business that both he and I worked at years ago. And the conversation kept coming back to, but I'd lose my health insurance. I mean, doesn't that put a damper on the entrepreneurial spirit? Doesn't that impede new business startups? People make decisions on that basis all the time. People decline to go into business for themselves because they can't afford health insurance, particularly people with families. Who benefits from that? To me, it's obvious that our health insurance problem, our health care problem, that's the general term I'm going to use for the cost of insurance and the cost for bills if you don't have insurance. Health care costs in this country, they hold us back. They prevent businesses from starting. They cripple businesses that are operating. Why we are not aggressively attacking this issue is beyond me. And how it got to this point and then continues to be deferred, it's just a matter of simple logic. You can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, and that's what we're doing with our health care crisis in this country. We do the same thing, which is nothing, and we somehow expect the crisis to ease, and it's not. It's not going to. And there's no logical reason to believe that it will. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about socialized medicine and about the debate that's coming up July 12th. We'll take a quick break here now at 8:30 or so, I guess we're at. And for local news, you are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. Okay, we left off talking about health care and the decisions that people make or don't make based on the availability of health care and how, in my view, it prevents people from going into business, or it's at least a consideration. And I'll get to the phone calls in just a minute, but I do want to go over this whole issue of socialized medicine. You've already seen the comments from the Republican side about it being government-run health care and things of that nature. I guess my question on that is, what if it is? What's the alternative being offered? I don't hear it. And if you don't have an alternative, if you don't have something to defend yourself, but are rather just criticizing somebody else's proposal, then what are you really adding to the whole thing? And let me ask you this. Has Medicare been such a failure? That's socialized medicine. How many people who advocate against socialized medicine are either in receipt of Medicare or have relatives are in receipt of Medicare? I don't see them in any rush to renounce it or to not accept that benefit. I don't see that happen very often. Is there any evidence that Medicare doesn't work? You know, this whole notion of socialized medicine, it's a way to get you thinking it's anti-American. That's what it is. We're Americans. We're not socialists here. We already have socialized medicine for a large segment of our population. So what's the problem? You know, this whole thing about being anti-American, you know what's anti-American? The loss of GM. I thought GM was pretty darn American myself. And healthcare costs played a role in crippling it. with nobody offering to help. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Got Frank on the line. Frank, you there?
Hi, Rob.
How are you?
Good. Hey, you asked a question. Didn't you see the old Newsweek cover? It says we're all socialists now.
Well, I'm not.
Well, at least you are, maybe.
I'm not a socialist.
Okay, hey, let's talk about finance.
Okay.
Universal health care. You know that the Obamacons want to change how cost projections are done.
What's an Obamacon?
Someone who favors Obama.
Okay.
Someone who works for the Obama
You're barely within the boundaries of the rules of the show, but go ahead.
Oh, come on. Anyway, historically, the projections have made by the CBO. The CBO projects that this universal health care system, whatever it is, because I haven't seen it defined very well, it's supposed to cost $1 trillion. So I won't call them Obamacons, I'll just say the Obama administration. They want to now take these projections, they want to put it into the OMB, the Office of Management Budgets, so they can control the numbers a little better.
Well, but what is the alternative to what we have? I mean, do you accept that what we have right now as a healthcare system in this country works?
Well, I like the way my system works.
Which is what?
Well, the health insurances that I have.
Okay. And
it required a whole lot of work because every year I have to change these things. I have a whole bunch of options to go through, and I didn't particularly care about how this was set up because the rules were I had to pick one option, which meant I didn't have prescription care. So I had to go through about 60 more options and pick one of those. And, you said, does it work well? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I've just had a 3-month fight over an extremely expensive prescription. And I had to bug these people, like every week.
What if you had socialized medicine? What if you had it like it was in Canada? I mean, I read to you earlier that Canada spends 9.7% of its gross domestic product on health care costs. We spend twice that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's such a bad thing, and I'm not endorsing it or opposing it, I'm just saying it seems to be rejected out of hand on the basis of just the way it's characterized.
Well, I'll tell you, I just talked to a guy who's moving to Canada because of the job situation here. He's marrying a Canadian gal. The Canadian gal is, guess what? She's a nurse in Canada. And I said, how do you like the Canadian medical system? He says, it stinks. It takes 3 years to 5 years to get a GP. Now, how do you like that situation?
Well, if it's true, I mean, I wouldn't, but that doesn't mean we'd be. I'd like to think we'd innovate a little, if that's true.
Oh, well, I mean, why would he lie? He's going there, and his future wife is a nurse, and he said, well, if you have a problem, just like in the United States, if you have not much money, if you have a lot of money, you don't care. You can go wherever you want and just spend your bucks. But if you're poor, you go to a hospital and you say, take care of me, whether it's go into the emergency rooms and talk to these people. I've been quite a lot into emergency rooms in the last 3 or 4 years.
You mean
being treated
locally?
Yeah, locally.
Okay.
And it's people bringing their kids in for colds and whatever. I mean, that's part of the system. What happens when you take care of the 15 million illegal aliens? And you better believe that Obama's going to cover them. I mean, it's unbelievable what this thing is going to cost. A couple of weeks ago, I talked to a British fellow, and I was kind of surprised. I said, well, what do you do if you have to have an operation? He said, I'm going back to England to have it done. He said, if you're poor in this country, it's easy. You just walk into the emergency room and you get taken care of. If you're rich, you don't have to worry. Because if you're in the middle, it's bad. So, this is what he told me about the English system. Yeah, it takes a lot longer to get to see, in Canada, specialists. Okay? It may take up to 18 months. In England, for serious situations, if you're especially old, you're just told, well, hey, we can't afford that particular type of medicine. And this was a reference to breast cancer. And, you're in essence, you're going to die. That's it, if you're old and you have something like that.
All right, I got to get to another caller, but here's what I'm going to do. For next week's show, I'm going to get to the bottom of how long it takes in these countries that have something that I guess we loosely refer to as socialized medicine. Although in Canada, I think it's pretty straightforward that it is. I'm going to find out, and I'm going to see if I can find the facts comparing our health care to theirs.
Let me say just one other thing quickly.
Okay.
Social Security was intended as an aid or an adjunct to retirement. Now it seems like most retirees want Social Security to pay 100% for all their living expenses. I mean everything: rent, medicine, food, etc. And the same thing is happening in the health system. You said about Medicare. Well, I'm in Medicare, and there is unbelievable redundancy there. I mean, you go in, they say, "Hey, do you need this? Do you need this?" I could have got 10 times over what I needed, and there's just no oversight there.
Well, then let's cut the costs.
That's what they're going to do with Medicare and Medicaid if they go into this universal health care.
No, I mean,
Obama has even said that.
He has said that. I mean the redundant costs. All right, I got to get to another call. Thanks for calling, Frank.
Have fun.
Okay, Lucas, you there?
Yes, I am. Now, I think you said, how did GM get into paying for their employees' health care?
Well, no, the question I had was, where did we start with employers in general
World War II.
becoming responsible for that?
What it is that to buy labor peace during the war and all that, and because companies couldn't make the pay concessions and all that, they offered the health care and the pensions and all the rest. In other words, pay in the future, so you could get the workers back on the production lines to meet the wartime crisis.
Okay.
And that's what started. And what happened is it was never given back because back in World War II, government said give in to the unions and all that, and the management at a lot of these unionized corporations started simply giving in to the union demands, especially the ones that had government contracts. They passed that cost on to the government. What's happened is you get the situation with all these government sales. You have several problems at work. One is the larger any human organization gets, less efficient it becomes. Doesn't matter what you're talking about, even the military with military discipline. The larger the military, the less efficient it becomes. But and the thing is you could put everything under government control. Government makes bad decisions. And the thing is let's look at how. I mean, by and large, our current economic mess is largely due to decisions made in government by, in many cases, the people who are in charge of things right now. Just because George Bush was president for 8 years, let's face it, once he lost his bid to give amnesty to illegal aliens, he basically just stopped governing and let the Democrats run the show.
Well, and I appreciate you informing us as far as where this got started. I did not know. Do you think that American businesses should be required to provide health insurance for their employees?
No. If someone can get private insurance and all that, the problem is as things stand now, if you go in and offer a package in other words, if an employer can say, I can deliver 50 employees as health care benefits, you can get a lower rate from the insurance company than if each person went out on their own to try and secure their own health benefits.
But why should the employer be doing it at all, is my question.
Well, it depends. If an employer needs that as an inducement for someone to work, I mean, let's face it, people who work for the government, for example, they get the health care benefits as part of the condition of not getting the kind of wages that would be available in the private sector. So, in other words, you could argue you should let there be a choice. If someone figures, hey, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm not going to have any health problems for the next 20 or 30 years, so I don't need to pay money in health insurance now, then fine, let them work without health insurance.
But doesn't this all get back to the overwhelming cost of, this all gets back to the prohibitive cost of health care. Everybody is afraid to be without some sort of coverage because costs themselves are so high they can't possibly afford them. When are we going to look at that is my point.
What happens is that every so often for some people, let's say for my parents, in their lifetime they never hit the catastrophic, so they probably any health insurance they had, the insurance companies came out way ahead of the game. But there are other people where they might have some serious health issue that comes along when they turn 50 or 60 or 70 or whenever, and it may require, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of health care.
And that
is what scares everyone, because potentially that is what can happen to you. Now, the thing is you could come up with some sort of catastrophic health care where, let's say, if you go past the magic number, let's say if the healthcare cost exceeds maybe more, in other words, if treatment for some illness goes something like more than 80% of a person's annual income or something like that, then the government will step in and make up the difference.
Okay, I got a couple more callers I got to get to. Thanks for calling in.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
I just think it all gets back to the cost itself. I mean, the underlying issue here seems to be cost. You've got to induce employees to with health insurance because they know they're in dire straits without it. To me, it just keeps coming back to the same thing with costs, and there's no emphasis on any proposals to address that issue. None that I've heard. Okay, I think Rex, you there? Rex, you there?
Yes, right here.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks. I would say, you say we need to change it. Instead of trying to go more towards the left, why don't we go back to the way it used to be? I don't know how old you are, but I mean, when I was a little kid, I'm in my 40s, when I was a little kid, very few people, I come from the West, very few people had, employer-backed health care. You paid for it yourself. But just like that caller a couple callers ago, when he spoke about Social Security, now they want everything to pay for everything with that. Same thing with medical care now. It just like with automobile insurance. It's for catastrophic stuff. If you have, if your windshield gets broken, you pay for it. If your tire goes flat, you pay for it. When you total the car, that's when they step in. And I think if we can go back to the way it used to be, it seems to me that when
So you're advocating something like the tail end of the last call, where after a certain amount the government steps in.
Well, no, I don't even know.
Or insurance steps in.
Government, yeah, the insurance should step in. You talk about costs.
Yeah,
when did costs start going up? Medicare was enacted in the 60s. Before that, did you ever hear about problems with health care? Ever? No. But as soon as the government got involved, it's been on a downhill spiral ever since then. I don't think you can name one single organization that the United States government runs that it runs efficiently or economically feasibly.
Well, I actually would disagree with that. I think they do a good job with the CDC. I think they do a good job with some other things as well. But as far as the cost, though, it seems like we keep not addressing the cost. We talk about it in terms of, well, when the cost gets to this high, that's when insurance should kick in, or the cost gets that high immediately. That's the issue that nobody talks about, nobody addresses.
Okay, well,
why is it 50? I know somebody whose son went to the emergency room for a bloody nose, $1,200.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Why do you go to?
They couldn't stop it.
Noses as a kid.
They couldn't stop it.
Okay, well, stuff happens.
That's not a $1,200 problem.
You're right.
Until we address the fact that is right now that is a $1,200 problem. And you heard me. I don't know if you were listening at the beginning of the show, but most of the people who file for bankruptcy with medical bills, 68%, had insurance. It's the cost that is so obscene, and it goes without scrutiny. It goes without any serious effort to reform it.
Right. I had a motorcycle accident when I was in the Navy, and I had to go to a civilian hospital, and the Navy picked up the whole tab, but I got to see the itemized bill at the end of it. And it had everything itemized, this surgery and anesthesia this and medicine this. And at the very bottom of it said $4,000 for miscellaneous expenses. I'm like, what's that? That was them, getting there because a lot of people can't pay. So then they, charges get added on to people that can pay. To make up the difference.
I got a couple more callers. I got to do a break first. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
But I just can't. To me, looking at this issue, I never get past the costs, and why that isn't our threshold issue is beyond me. We try and figure out all these different ways to pay for this stuff without ever trying to determine why it costs so much, and without ever reforming that. We will be back. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. I'm going to try and bring up Nicholas from Binghamton. You there?
Yeah, absolutely. How you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
Good. I'm not personally in favor of socialized medicine, quote unquote. But you were curious about the cost, and I've given this a lot of thought. Like, why does it cost so much to see the doctor? And I think a lot of it has to do with their malpractice insurance that they pay out, and I think a lot of it has to do with their schooling costs. I mean, these guys go to school for 12 years, and a lot of them are on scholarships, and I think a lot of people, are sue happy, and they're scared, and they don't just sue for a few thousand. They sue for millions. So, I mean, they got to cover, their behinds that way. So I think, a combination of those two, and I'm sure there's other factors as well, but, I mean, I think that, if you could, make maybe some adjustments to the educational costs, and if people, had a gentleman's agreement with the AMA not to go, sue a doctor for $500,000 if he leaves a sponge in him, if other than that he's fine, I mean, I think that, would bring the cost down to a more, level field.
Okay, thanks very much for calling.
All right.
We'll talk to you. Okay, I got one more I want to try and get to here. Steve, you there?
Yes, I'm here, Rob. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for calling in.
I have many things I could talk about, but I think we're going to run out of time.
Yeah, I actually got to make this kind of short.
I think I'll post these on your website like I've posted other things.
Okay.
Okay, and in relation to cost, there was an article, I think it was in Fortune magazine, it might have even been 2 years ago, and they looked at cost, and they said most of the cost came from either people coming to the emergency room for little things or people who are older who go to like nursing homes that they pay for. And they thought the article suggested that if, for example, instead of having an emergency room, the nosebleed example you had, that you had an outside clinic, because a lot of people go to emergency rooms for nothing. In the 70s, I took an economics class at SUNY Binghamton, and they were talking about the same problem back then, and it's amazing that it's still there. And the thought was is to allow people who are older to stay at home and use electronic devices to monitor how they were doing, rather than have them in nursing homes, just a way to reduce the cost. Now, if you look around the Internet, you find there's a lot of reasons costs are high. A lot of it has to do with government regulations in terms of the number of available beds and things like this. I might be able to find them again. I've looked them in the past.
Well, then I say let's reform them. Let's start with the costs, and then figure out how to pay for it, rather than accepting the costs and paying for it when it cripples American business and families can't pay for it either.
Yeah, another thing, the reason businesses cover costs is simply because it's a tax deduction. It turned out it was an convenient way to attract workers originally. And that's the argument about having people pay taxes on insurance, because it would make them more careful on how that money is spent. I'll take, for example, your car insurance. Like, I have a $2,000 deductible on my car insurance.
Okay.
It's hard to find even. But it reduced my cost to, a couple $100 a year. And a lot of these, again, that's back to the original argument, like the article in Fortune magazine. If you're willing to deal with those small costs and start shopping for things, the overall costs drop dramatically. And I think, actually, if the government controlled it, people would be still in the hospital for weeks at a time.
Well, not if the government wouldn't pay for it. And that's how the government, in my view, has to look at this. Thanks for calling in. I gotta wind up here, but if part of the reform was that the government wouldn't pay for it, what would happen then? I think in the last year or so, as we have felt a real crisis economically in this country, and when we had the gas prices at $4 a gallon, when people are forced to, they start considering things they thought they would never consider before. That's what it takes to change behavior. And I'm not sure all behavior needs to change when it comes to seeking medical, I'm not saying that, medical attention, but, until you force the issue, people don't change. And I think that a good crisis like we have right now with healthcare, as we have in business, will bring about innovation, but only if it's dealt with. People will come up with creative ways to solve problems when they perceive them to be real problems. And as long as these issues go unaddressed, they're not real problems in people's lives. Okay, we've got about a minute left. Again, I just want to remind people that the debate is July 12th at SUNY Binghamton at Binghamton University at the Waters Theater. You have to pre-register at www.udefendit.com in order to go. It's a pilot that we're filming, and we're taking it to the networks. It's coming along well right now. Everybody's in place. The topic will be the role of the Supreme Court Justice. The two people who are debating are incredibly qualified. And one of them, Kurt Levy, will be at the hearings to confirm Obama's nominee. It's worth showing up for, so I hope you do, but you have to pre-register. That's going to do it for me. Thank you for listening to You Defend It, and we will see you next week.